got to give it up.
The views expressed on this episode of Walking Through the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions with Chris Schroeder do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting or our affiliates. KHLT is not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
Tell my mama and tell my pa that their fine young son didn't get far. He made it to the end of a battle, sitting in a sleazy bar. He tried hard, but his spirit broke. He tried until he nearly choked. In the end, he lost his battle, drinking alcohol. Got to give it up.
And now here's those two guys who investigate prior to contempt, Chris and the Monty Man.
Well, welcome, my friends and recovery family. This is the Monty Man, your co-host here at Walking Through the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. And Chris Schroeder is on the line with us. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Monty. How are you doing this week?
I'm doing excellent. We've had a great week here at the station. We're updating things, and if those of you who are listening have not checked out the rest of the station, we have a different show every day of the week. You want to check that out. But today, our topic is where are we at? Step 2 in the 12 by 12.
We're on step 2 this week.
In the book, The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. If you don't have a copy of that, folks, and you want to read along, you can simply go to aa.org, and you'll bring up, there'll be a link there to bring up the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, and we are on step 2. So, Chris, take us away here, buddy.
Okay, Monty, the first week we covered the forward and some other material, just some historical material. Last week we covered step 1. I think it's important to quickly go over a little bit of that. The book 12 Steps and 12 Traditions was put together by Bill Wilson and finished off in the very early 50s. The reason for the book was the prominent reason for the book was for the publication of the traditions in a form that would be available very easily. The traditions had been written, but they were only available in the Grapevine magazine or in the back of, I think they started putting them in the back of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. But, Bill felt really strongly that they should become a part of each group's operational methodology, and so he published the book, the 12 and 12. He put the essays on the steps in there for a number of reasons. One of them was to broaden and deepen the concepts of the steps, and talk a little bit about the experience and some of the history and some of the practical application. But mainly it was to get you to buy the book so that you would have the 12 traditions. It wasn't meant to supersede in any way the instructions for the steps in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And then last week we talked a lot about step 1. Step 1 is quite possibly the most misunderstood step in 12-step programs. So often people pay lip service to powerlessness, yet don't give it enough credit. Powerlessness at its depth is basically you do not play a part in whether you use or whether you drink. That if you're powerless, you don't have power to not do it. You don't have power to do it. You don't have power to stay away from it. You don't have power to stick with it. You're powerless. And so many people will talk about powerlessness and then act like you have power. And or a treatment center will be a 12-step treatment center, and then they'll put the responsibility for using on you.
Right.
I mean, it's just people just completely misunderstand step 1. Step 1 basically is until you have a power greater than yourself working in you and through you that is not of you. Until that happens, you are going to continue to relapse and not be able to stay away from, whether it's drugs or alcohol or gambling or whatever. You're not going to be able to stop until there's a power that can work in you and through you. And that's basically step one, along with the unmanageability, which is emotional, it's mental, it's psychological, it's situational. It's not good news at all. It's basically saying that your life is going to spin out of control, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how much you know that you could be doing it better. You're not really going to be able to, and that's another part of the powerlessness. It's tied up in the unmanageability of life. And with all that being said, the good news is basically that step two is a solution. Is a solution step. Step one is a problem step. Step two is a solution step. And I think what we should probably do is we should start reading. And this is on page 25 of the book 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Step two, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. The moment they read step two, most AA newcomers are confronted with a dilemma, sometimes a serious one. How often have we heard them cry out, "Look what you people have done to us. You have convinced us that we are alcoholics and that our lives are unmanageable. Having reduced us to a state of absolute helplessness, you now declare that none but a higher power can remove our obsession. Some of us won't believe in God, others can't, and still others who do believe in that God exists have no faith whatever He will perform this miracle. Yes, you've got us over the barrel, right, but where do we go from here?" Now, I still marvel at the power in Bill Wilson's prose. He does not mince words. Yet practically everybody that's involved in 12-step recovery, that's involved with a 12-step style treatment center, minimize the problem in step one. But Bill Wilson doesn't.
No.
You have been reduced to a state of absolute helplessness. And only a higher power can remove your obsession. And he continues to cover that. So often in the book Alcoholics Anonymous and in the book 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, he'll tell you what he's going to tell you. He'll then tell you, and then he'll tell you what he told you. He wants to make sure that you understand the full ramifications of this stuff, because there's just something in the alcoholic or the drug addict's personality or belief systems that really it's not conducive for this type of surrender. Very, very few people can really get how much trouble they're in unless they're in the middle of it.
He was really good at saying the same thing but putting it in different words over and over and over again. And I think that I agree with you. We have a tendency to learn by repetition, but if we know it's repetition, if we recognize it, we put it down. But he has just such a wonderful way of just speaking the same thing over and over and over again, and you don't realize it. And that's why I cringe when I hear people saying they're not willing to read this stuff, because it is so powerful. So often that there's a trend. There's a trend in the 12-step fellowships to minimize, to find easier, softer ways. Yeah.
There are groups that use the book Living Sober, and there are a lot of the other fellowships, basically the fellowships for overcoming drugs, have literature that kind of soft sells. It's more about telling stories really than it is about telling you how bad the problem is,
sure,
and what you're going to need to do to solve it. I think more and more in the 12-step fellowships, people are more interested in not hurting anybody's feelings and opening the doors wide enough that everybody that has any kind of problem can come in. And I like going back to the earlier foundational literature, like the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions and the book Alcoholics Anonymous. It does not mince words. It tells you that you are suffering from a fatal malady. It is going to kill you, and it's not going to be pretty while it's doing so. You are going to be bankrupt as a human concern, is basically what this tells you.
Yeah.
And he just doesn't kid around. I mean, I'm in agreement with that. I think true compassion is to allow someone to truly and fully understand the problem. That's true compassion, because in this book, again and again, and in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, again and again, they state over and over that the more trouble a person realizes they're in, the more serious they're going to take a recovery solution. And it's many of the people that die who get brief introductions to 12-step fellowships but never engage. Many of them are not under the impression that they didn't do what they were supposed to do. They really thought that just by going there, whatever was going to happen was going to happen. They were never convinced that it's not just the meetings, it's the 12-step recovery process. They weren't convinced of that. And there's probably 5 million people out there drinking and drugging who, if you asked them whether they'd been to NA, CA, AA, or whatever, they would have said, yes, it didn't work for me, when really all they did was go to meetings. Again, I like to pull back, and I like to use this literature. It's incredibly important to do that. When you understand how grievous the problem is, you be about the business of the solution.
Yeah.
I don't know if I talked about this last week, Monty, but somebody that I knew very, very well, and you even knew him too, if not in person, by name, that I worked with in some of in Treatment and Recovery Partners with Southworth Associates. What was the name of it? I can't even remember now the name, but this is somebody that I did a whole lot of work with about between 2 and 3 years ago. And I heard the other night from a friend that he had taken his life.
Oh.
Now, this is an individual who, was very successful, blew up his life with drugs and alcohol, came into to recovery, worked the steps, got his act together, was doing very, very well. He had meanwhile lost his family and some other stuff, but he was doing the best he could. I thought, putting together a business and trying to support his loved ones the best he could. It just came as a surprise. I hadn't talked to him about 6 months, but it came as a surprise the other night that he'd taken his life. This stuff is serious. I mean, a month doesn't go by when I don't hear about some tragedy. Yes. So paying attention to what Bill talks about, and not soft selling it, not turning this thing into a self-help program. Yay, we don't use today. Not doing that is an important thing. Understanding just how serious this is an important thing. Yeah. Let's look first at the case of the one who says he won't believe, the belligerent one. He's in a state of mind which can be described only as savage. His whole philosophy of life in which he so gloried is threatened. It's bad enough, he thinks, to admit alcohol has him down for keeps. But now, still smarting from that admission, he is faced with something really impossible. How does he cherish the thought that man, risen so majestically from a single cell in the primordial ooze, is the spearhead of evolution, and therefore the only God that his universe knows? Must he renounce all to save himself? And again, many people come into recovery with unnatural prejudice against religion, against God, against spirituality, and that can be one of the most dangerous things for the person who is getting involved with recovery. Not being able to let go of those old ideas, not being able to set aside one's prejudices and one's belief systems. That inability to set that aside, to be open to a new experience, I think is what kills probably more alcoholics and addicts than anything else.
Sure.
At this juncture, his AA sponsor usually laughs. This, the newcomer thinks, is just about the last straw. This is the beginning of the end. And so it is. The beginning of the end of his old life and the beginning of his emergence into a new one. His sponsor probably says, take it easy. The hoop you have to jump through is a lot wider than you think. At least I've found it so. So did a friend of mine who was a one-time vice president of the American Atheist Society, but he got through with room to spare. Well, says the newcomer, I know you're telling me the truth. It's no doubt a fact that AA is full of people who once believed as I do. But just how, in these circumstances, does a fellow take it easy? That's what I want to know. That, agrees the sponsor, is a very good question indeed. I think I can tell you exactly how to relax. You won't have to work very hard at it either. Listen, if you will, to these three statements. First, Alcoholics Anonymous does not demand that you believe anything. All of its 12 steps are but suggestions. Second, to get sober and to stay sober, you don't have to swallow all of step 2 right now. Looking back, I find that I took it piecemeal myself. Third, all you really need is a truly open mind. Just resign from the debating society and quit bothering yourself with such deep questions as whether it was the hen or the egg that came first. Again, I say, all you need is an open mind. And I found that that's very, very, very true, Monty. There's somebody I've been working with a long time. Now, this guy is a really, really close friend of mine. I met him in like 3rd grade, and we've remained friends ever since. And he was an old drinking buddy of mine. And then I heard that he was, he was really in a lot of trouble. He was living in a bottle gang. He had gone all the way down, and he was actually living out on the railroad tracks, drinking with the winos.
Right.
And I got some recovery tapes to him, and we hooked back up as friends. We hadn't talked in about 10 years. And this was about 15 years ago. Now, I've been in this guy's life. As a matter of fact, I was talking to him last night when he was on the phone with me drunk. He's just somebody, Monty, I'm not going to give up on. Probably a normal person that I'd be working with, I would have let go a long time ago. But, this is a childhood friend of mine. I'm just not willing to write him out of my life. Mm-hmm. But his issue is it's a God issue. He is one of those guys who is chronically addicted to knowing. And there are things that he has to know. Things like, if God exists, why was there the Holocaust? Why was there the tsunami? He's one of these individuals who is roadblocked by philosophical booby traps, and he can't move forward. He can't get past them. Have you ever met people like that, Monty?
Yeah, I'm working with a guy right now that's just like that. He can't get past. If he can't explain it, then he questions it, and I can't explain, God to the degree that this guy wants me to explain it to him.
Yeah, it asks, please resign from the debating society and stop worrying about whether it was the hen or the egg. Here's the thing. If you're going to be one of those people who absolutely won't move forward until something is answered, you're like the guy on the Titanic who is not going to get in the lifeboat until he finds out who was responsible for watching for icebergs.
That's
you know what
good.
I mean?
That's good.
I'm not going anywhere until I find out whose fault this is.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Don't worry about why. Get in the lifeboat. You are going down. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing with addiction and alcoholism recovery. You are going down. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but you are going down. Resign from the debating society and get in the lifeboat with us. And the hoop that you have to jump through is not going to be as small as you think.
Yeah.
You know, anybody, as long as they have an open mind, can walk into this. The sponsor continues, take, for example, my own case. I had scientific schooling. Naturally, I respected, venerated, even worshipped science. As a matter of fact, I still do, all except the worship part. Time after time, my instructors held up to me the basic principles of all scientific progress. Search and research, again and again, always with the open mind. When I first looked at AA, my reaction was just like yours. This AA business I thought is totally unscientific. This I can't swallow. I simply won't consider such nonsense. Then I woke up. I had to admit that AA showed results, prodigious results. I saw that my attitude regarding these had been anything but scientific. It wasn't AA that had the closed mind, it was me. The minute I stopped arguing, I could begin to see and feel. Right there, step 2, gently and very gradually began to infiltrate my life. I can't say upon what occasion or upon what day I came to believe in a power greater than myself, but I certainly have that belief now. To acquire it, I had only to stop fighting and practice the rest of the AA program as enthusiastically as I could. So that's an instruction right there. If you're having a lot of problem with God and whether or not God will relieve you of your alcoholism or your drug addiction, what you need to do is you need to stop fighting and practice the rest of the steps as enthusiastically as you can.
I really like what it says, step 2, gently and very gently is the word I'm looking at, because I have found that God is a gentleman, and that he's never bashed me over the head and said, believe in me, you idiot. You know, it's been a very gentle process.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, there's the real big problem today with, you know, Monty, I had the unbelievable honor of being one of the Saturday night panel speakers at the Cape Cod Symposium on Addictive Disorders a couple of months back. Now, I just couldn't believe that, coming from where I came from to be up at that podium, that was something special. But anyway, basically what my talk was about the efficacy of the 12-step process in professional addiction treatment and how important it is. Now, so often, Monty, people don't understand the spiritual aspects of recovery, especially if they have letters after their name.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, you bet.
Especially if they're PhDs. PhDs are the dumbest people you can be dealing with addiction and alcoholism recovery, believe it or not, because they're very close-minded at where it goes into the spiritual. Now, the only thing that we care about is we actually care about results. We actually care in the 12-step fellowships about results, and that's a very inconvenient thing for a lot of the people who put these treatment processes together. You know, many of them are not wanting the 12-step fellowships into the treatment centers to bring in meetings. There's even a lot of them now that aren't even referring out to the 12-step treatment fellowships because they can't get with the God thing. Now, here's the problem with that. We care about results, okay? And rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed the path. There's incredible results behind that statement. And if you look at the results from non-spiritual recovery processes, they are pathetic.
Yeah.
If they're 6%, that's a lot. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what's the true inconvenient truth for a lot of these treatment professionals when they're trying to criticize the 12 steps is that the 12-step process works. It's worked for 80 years now, and it will continue to work for the people that participate in the recovery process. And it's the only thing that has brought about wholesale recovery in the millions that's existed. there's a lot of people come up with a lot of different processes for overcoming addiction of one form or another, and they never pan out. They never show any real results. They never get above 10%.
Mm-hmm.
So again, when we say rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path, that's true. And I don't know how verifiable it is because it's difficult to get statistics from an anonymous fellowship, but it's observable. You can see these recoveries if you go to the right places to observe them.
Yep.
This is only one man's opinion based on his own experience, of course. I must quickly assure you that AAs tread innumerable paths in their quest for faith. If you don't care for the one I've suggested, you'll be sure to discover one that suits, if only you look and listen. Many a man like you has begun to solve the problem by a method of substitution. You can, if you wish, make AA itself your higher power. Here is a very large group of people who have solved their alcohol problem. In this respect, they are certainly a power greater than you, who have not even come close to a solution. Surely you can have faith in them. Even this minimum of faith will be enough. You will find many members who have crossed the threshold just this way. All of them will tell you that once across, their faith broadened and deepened. Relieved of the alcohol obsession, their lives unaccountably transformed. They came to believe in a higher power, and most of them began to talk of God. Now, Monty, personally, my personal story is I believed in God, but I didn't believe that God was going to be active and a part of my recovery. I didn't believe that God would care enough to lend a hand. That was my lack of faith. So I was like this person. When I first showed up in the support groups. How I did it was just like that. I came to believe that my contact from rehab and the support group was a power greater than myself. I started to do some other things, and very, very soon I started to gather the awareness that there was an interventionary deity who was going to get involved in my life and help perform a wholesale miracle with me. And, so I can kind of understand that. I don't believe that you should think that the doorknob is your God, like for the rest of your life or something. But if you need to begin somewhere, that's great. And if you continue with an open mind, you, like most of us, are going to end up with a very powerful personal relationship with God.
And that's where, you see, I hear a lot of folks, you take that statement, you can, if you wish, make AA itself your higher power, period, end of subject. And they think that in the beginning, in step one, where it says only an act of providence, we talked about that last week. Well, isn't that a contradiction? No, because here we're talking about a beginning. We're talking about a starting out point, a place where if you, like you just said, have an open mind, something is going to happen to you, and it's going to go further than that. If your God is the 12 steps, I challenge you. Everybody is listening. I challenge you. At some point, if you keep an open mind, it will go deeper than that. It needs to go deeper than that. But to start out with, so many people won't walk through the doors because they think they have to come to believe in a specific higher power today. And because it says, may you find him now. Well, we want that for everybody. But I think this is why it is so important to read things in context and read all of it. Because if we don't, we start doing this thing where we just start picking and choosing, and we create our own God, and then we become the creator, and guess what? We're right back where we started from.
Yeah, I agree so much with you, Monty. Bill was very careful about the words that he chose, and the sentences that he put together. I don't know of anybody who rewrote and re-edited his material more than Bill did. He was crazy about it. And so you have to know that he means exactly what he is saying, and you need to not edit him. So when he basically says that you can make AA your higher power, but what will happen is you will develop a relationship with God. You will come to believe pretty quickly. That's what he means.
Yeah.
And if it's not happening for you, you aren't enthusiastically practicing the rest of the steps.
That's right.
Consider next the plight of those who once had faith but lost it. There will be those who have drifted into indifference, those filled with self-sufficiency who have cut themselves off, those who have become prejudiced against religion, and those who are downright defiant because God has failed to fulfill their demands. Can AA experience tell all these they may still find a faith that works? Sometimes AA comes harder to those who have lost or rejected faith than to those who never had any faith at all, for they think they have tried faith and found it wanting. That's a huge problem. If you think you've tried it and it's not going to work for you, and you remain convinced that you've tried it and it's not going to work for you, that's a bad place to be.
Yeah.
You know, that happens to a lot of people that go into AA or NA and end up relapsing. They truly believe that they've tried it and it didn't work. You know, they weren't exposed to the recovery program. They were exposed to the fellowship nonsense.
Right.
They have tried the way of faith and the way of no faith. Since both ways have proved bitterly disappointing, they have concluded that there is no place whatever for them to go. The roadblocks of indifference, fancied self-sufficiency, prejudice, and defiance often prove more solid and formidable for these people than any erected by the unconvinced agnostic or even the militant atheist. Religion says the existence of God can be proved, the agnostic says it can't be proved, and the atheist claims proof of the non-existence of God. Obviously, the dilemma of the wanderer from faith is that of profound confusion. He thinks himself lost to the comfort of any conviction at all. He cannot attain, even in a small degree, the assurance of the believer, the agnostic, or the atheist. He is the bewildered one. Any number of AAs can say to the drifter, yes, we were diverted from our childhood faith too. The overconfidence of youth was too much for us. Of course, we were glad that good home and religious training had been given us certain values. We were still sure that we ought to be fairly honest, tolerant, and just, that we ought to be ambitious and hardworking. We became convinced that such simple rules of fair play and decency would be enough. As material success founded upon no more than these ordinary attributes began to come to us, we felt we were winning at the game of life. That was exhilarating, and it made us happy. Why should we be bothered with theological abstractions and religious duties, or with the state of our souls here or hereafter? The here and now was good enough for us. The will to win would carry us through. But then alcohol began to have its way with us. Finally, when all our scorecards read 0, and we saw that one more strike would put us out of the game forever, we had to look for our lost faith. It was in AA that we rediscovered it, and so can you. And certainly, this is something that I understand from personal experience. It was more a matter, Monty. It was more a matter of aligning my will and aligning my actions in a way conducive for a spiritual experience than anything else.
People have. I found that a lot of people feel like they got to get cleaned up before they take a bath. You know what I'm saying? they feel like they're not good enough, and that they've got to. There's something they have to do to get themselves in right standing with God. And the truth of the matter is that I have found, anyway, in my relationship with God, is that I'm a human being. It's impossible for me to meet God at His level as far as like the expectations I think He's putting on me. I can't meet those. And then I discovered that God loves me just the way I am right now, just exactly the way I am. And that was such a relief for me, because I was always trying to my own father. I was always trying to measure up, and he was a highly decorated war hero, and he expected a lot and that kind of thing. And it was difficult to measure up. And I kind of transferred that with God, and I found out that God wasn't like that.
Yeah, again, so often we have so many different prejudices and
Gosh,
roadblocks.
yeah.
the greatest thing I think about all this is Bill was very, very clear that this was going to be a personal relationship that you were going to have with God, and you just need to be open-minded and you need to be willing. And what a great place to start.
I know, it's awesome.
There wasn't 100 hoops that you had to jump through. There was just God. God makes Himself known. The Father makes Himself known to those who are willing to look, and He went back to very, very age-old spiritual and religious understandings. When He put this book together. Now we come to another kind of problem: the intellectually self-sufficient man or woman. Many AAs can say, "Yes, we were like you, far too smart for our own good. We love to have people call us precocious. We used our education to blow ourselves up into prideful balloons. Though we were careful to hide this from others. Secretly, we felt we could float above the rest of the folks on our brain power alone. Scientific progress told us there was nothing man couldn't do. Knowledge was all-powerful. Intellect could conquer nature. Since we were brighter than most folks, so we thought, the spoils of victory would be ours for the thinking. The God of intellect displaced the God of our fathers, but again, John Barleycorn had other ideas. We who had won so handsomely in a walk turned into all-time losers. We saw we had to reconsider or die. We found many in AA who once thought as we did. They helped us to get down to our right size. By their example, they showed us that humility and intellect could be compatible, provided we placed humility first. When we began to do that, we received the gift of faith, a faith which works. This faith is for you, too. Bill talked a lot in this book about humility, and he's 12 or 15 years gone from the writing of the big book, and he's got some more experience, and he's had some more ups, and he's had some more downs, and he really talks a lot about humility. My favorite my favorite definition of humility, Monty, is an accurate self-appraisal. In other words, truly and accurately identifying where you are, how important you are, what kind of a role you play in this world, and so often the intellectually self-sufficient truly believe that they're God's gift to mankind, and working with them is tough. I had some of that myself. I come from a very smart family. My brother and sister, I have a brother and sister, they're both PhD college professors. My mother and father were both Phi Beta Kappa graduates from really good colleges, and it's just intelligence just runs through my family in a ridiculous way. And then there's me. But I certainly suffered from that intellectual self-sufficiency. If you were a Schroeder, you had a little bit more on the ball than the average person, and that was basically a belief I had to overcome. And humility is basically, look, I'm dying of alcoholism. Doesn't matter how smart I am. I'm not going to outsmart my way out of dying from alcoholism. I have to participate in a recovery process just like the Goober Piles do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. And if it truly is, if we really believe this is an illness or a disease and so forth, then we can't outsmart our way out. If we're dying of cancer and we got 2 months to live,
yeah, absolutely.
You can't think your way through that.
No, you can't say, cancer, I'm smarter than you, go away. I mean, no way. And same thing with this.
Right.
Another crowd of AAs say, we were plumb disgusted with religion and all its works. The Bible, we said, was full of nonsense. We could cite a chapter and verse, and we couldn't see the Beatitudes for the begats. In spots, its morality was impossibly good, and others it seemed impossibly bad. But it was the morality of the religionists themselves that really got us down. We gloated over the hypocrisy, bigotry, and crushing self-righteousness that clung to so many believers, even in their Sunday best. How we loved to shout the damaging fact that millions of the good men of religion were still killing one another off in the name of God. This all meant, of course, that we had substituted negative for positive thinking. After we came to AA, we had to recognize that this trait had been an ego-feeding proposition. In belaboring the sins of some religious people, we could feel superior to all of them. Moreover, we could avoid looking at some of our own shortcomings. Self-righteousness, the very thing that we had contemptuously condemned in others, was our own besetting evil.
This phony form of respectability was our undoing, so far as faith was concerned. But finally, driven to AA, we learned better. As psychiatrists have observed, defiance is the outstanding characteristic of many an alcoholic. So it's not strange that lots of us have had our day at defying God himself. Sometimes it's because God has not delivered us the good things of life which we specified, as a greedy child makes an impossible list for Santa Claus. More often, though, we had met up with some major calamity and to our way of thinking lost out because God deserted us. The girl we wanted to marry had other notions. We prayed God that she'd change her mind, but she didn't. We prayed for healthy children, and we were presented with sick ones, or none at all. We prayed for promotions at business, and none came. Loved ones upon whom we heartily depended were taken from us by so-called acts of God. Then we became drunkards and asked God to stop that, but nothing happened. This was the unkindest cut of all. Damn this faith business, we said. When we encountered AA, the fallacy of our defiance was revealed. At no time had we asked what God's will was for us. Instead, we had been telling him what it ought to be. No man we saw could believe in God and defy him too. Belief meant reliance, not defiance. That's amazing. That's an amazing shift in perception. It really is, especially for the alcoholic. In AA, we saw fruits of this belief. Men and women spared from alcohol's final catastrophe. We saw them meet and transcend their other pains and trials. We saw them calmly accept impossible situations, seeking neither to run nor to recriminate. This was not only faith, it was faith that worked under all conditions. We soon concluded that whatever price in humility we must pay, we would pay. Now let's take the guy full of faith but still reeking of alcohol. He believes he's devout. His religious observance is scrupulous. He's sure he still believes in God, but suspects that God doesn't believe in him. He takes pledges and more pledges. Following each, he not only drinks again, but acts worse than the last time. Valiantly, he tries to fight alcohol, imploring God's help, but the help doesn't come. What then can be the matter? To clergymen, doctors, friends, and families, the alcoholic who means well and tries hard is a heartbreaking riddle. To most AAs, he is not. There are too many of us who have been just like him and have found the riddle's answer. The answer has to do with the quality of faith rather than its quantity. This has been our blind spot. We supposed we had humility when we really didn't. We supposed we had been serious about religious practices when, upon honest appraisal, we found we had only been superficial. Or going to the other extreme, we had wallowed in emotionalism and had mistaken it for true religious feeling. In both cases, we had been asking something for nothing. The fact was we really hadn't cleaned house so the grace of God could enter us and expel the obsession. And cleaning house, Monty, is basically steps 3 through 10, really. Mm-hmm. In no deep or meaningful sense had we ever taken stock of ourselves, made amends to those we had harmed, or freely given to any other human being without any demand for reward. We had not even prayed rightly. We had always said, grant me my wishes instead of thy will be done. The love of God and man we understood not at all. Therefore we remained self-deceived and so incapable of receiving enough grace to restore us to sanity. So for us to receive enough grace to restore us to sanity, we really do have to clean house, Monty. We have to participate in a recovery process.
Yeah, and that's not a contradiction of what I said earlier, that you don't have to get cleaned up to take a bath. It's really not a contradiction. If you're a mess right now, God loves you, man. He does. But for your life to change, there's got to be a process that takes place, and for me, that was the steps.
Absolutely, there's got to be a fundamental change. You know, there's something definitely wrong. If you know,
because I was Chris, I was that guy that they last described there. You know, I was in ministry. I was a youth pastor. I was an associate pastor, and one day I found myself showing up at a youth event intoxicated. I hit it pretty well, but then the next thing I knew, without even turning around, I was drinking with the youth group. I was that guy that people in 12-step fellowships really hate.
Right.
You know, so I was that guy. I thought that and hey, man, I've been to Bible college. I've done this. I've got some, some things to show for it. Like, surely God's going to take this away from me, and nothing happened.
Yeah, so, it does make a little bit of sense what Bill says. It's about quality, not quantity.
You bet.
It's not how many times you're going to church. It's how you're engaging in a spiritual life. And again, I agree with that. I so do. It's not the smart people that make it in recovery. It's not it's not the lucky people. It's not the older people. It's not the younger people. You know who it is? It's the willing people who make it. The people who are really willing to do the things that you might find uncomfortable to do. The people that just hitch up their bootstraps and get about the business of doing what they're asked to do. And again, I started working with a new guy last night, and this is somebody who's been relapsing for 100 years. And I see a sense of willingness in him. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother. But I see desperation. I see a sense of willingness. I think that if I ask him to do certain things, he's going to do them. And you know what? If he doesn't, then he's going to be on his way. But if he does do the things that I ask him to do, if that willingness manifests and he actually gets it done, he's got a real good shot of recovery, even though he's been relapsing for 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Yep. Few indeed are the practicing alcoholics who have any idea how irrational they are, or seeing their irrationality can bear to face it. Some will be willing to term themselves problem drinkers, but cannot endure the suggestion that they are in fact mentally ill. They are abetted in this blindness by a world which does not understand the difference between sane drinking and alcoholism. Sanity is defined as soundness of mind, yet no alcoholic soberly analyzing his destructive behavior, whether the destruction fell on the dining room furniture or on his own moral fiber, can claim soundness of mind for himself. Therefore, step 2 is the rallying point for all of us. Whether agnostic, atheist, or former believer, we can stand together on this step. True humility and an open mind can lead us to faith, and every AA meeting is an assurance that God will restore us to sanity if we rightly relate ourselves to Him. So now, 3 different times, Bill has said that God will restore you to sanity. You will recover from alcoholism through spirituality if you rightly relate yourself to God. How do you rightly relate yourself to God? You take an honest shot at and do your best job with the 12 steps. And I'll tell you what, something magic happens during that process, and certainly after you've gotten through it, something magic has transpired in your life. That's certainly been my experience.
My what it did for me, even though I had all this head knowledge, and I'd heard it said in other ways. I mean, it wasn't anything new. But for some reason or another, I believe that God led me into the rooms of my 12-step fellowship. I wasn't kicking and screaming, but I certainly wasn't walking in on my own power. I know that. And for some reason, something clicked. As somebody that had gone through the steps and had worked them thoroughly, and their life had changed, they had a spiritual awakening as a result of those steps, took me through them. And what it did is for the first time, the steps showed my need for a higher power in my life, for a power that could restore me to sanity. I knew that, but it could never go from my head to my heart until that happened. And then I realized that it wasn't that there was power in the steps. It was that the steps were a tool to show me that I needed a power. And that's when it became clear to me. And that's when my life turned around.
And I'm the same way. It might be just a little different. That what the steps did was exposed me to the power.
Yeah.
Cleared away enough of my own issues that were blocking me from the power, for the power to have a clean shot at me, if that makes any sense.
It makes total sense, yeah. Wow. Wow. My goodness. Let me ask you this. How many, just off the top of your head, how many people do you work with, would you say, in a year's period of time?
In a year's period of time, I don't know, a dozen or more, probably. You know, in the course of my days, I've probably taken over 100, maybe a couple hundred people through the steps. In workshop formats, if you counted that, then it would go into the thousands.
Yeah.
But you know, personally, you know, and so often I can get criticized for this. Like, how do you work with all those? And it's really not onerous, Monty. You know, when probably twice a week or so, I'm meeting with somebody and we're doing step work, or we're doing fellowship stuff of one kind or another. We're going to we're catching up and getting current, going to a speaking commitment or something. And I've also become very, very discerning about who I work with and how I work with them. I used to work with just about anybody that asked. Now it's more about I work with the people who have proven to me they're willing to do the work. I don't waste my time anymore with somebody who just wants me to be their drama coach. And that's quite often the case. They want you to go to traffic court with them, but they don't want to come over to your house and start step work, for God's sake. They just want the drama coach, and I don't do that anymore. In the early days I did, but I know how not to waste my time now.
Right.
Because it's not just a waste of my time; it's a waste of their time too. If they really think they're involved with recovery because their drama is being coached by somebody, if they really think that, then that's doing them a disservice. It's not only wasting my time; it's allowing them to believe that they're involved in a solution when they're not.
Exactly. I have a very, very good friend who works with quite a number of folks, and he definitely qualifies them. He it talks about in the big book, talks about the alcoholic or the potential alcoholic or whoever. They need to be convinced that they're an alcoholic of the hopeless variety, and then the person working with them needs to be convinced, and the family needs to be convinced. I mean, that we're convinced is so important. And what he does, somebody will come to him, and recently somebody came to him and said, will you work with me? And he said, okay, this is what I want you to do. A, B, C. This is what I want you to do in this first week. And the person came back to him and says, I think I really need to work with somebody that thinks like I do.
Yeah.
And the guy had just come back from a relapse, too.
You know what that means, which means who's not going to inconvenience me with a bunch of stuff I don't want to do. Yeah.
I know.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm very nice to people like that.
Yeah.
But I do let them know that there's probably a better than average chance that they're wrong,
Yeah.
And if they're willing to pay the price of being wrong, that's fine. I'll be around if they make it back.
Sure.
No?
Yeah, you bet. The door, sometimes the door is closed, but it's not locked. You can still walk through it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, next week we're going to be talking about step 3 in the 12 by 12. And again, if you don't have a 12 by 12, you're not able to get a hold of one, you can go to aa.org /12 and 12, and a PDF file of the book will come up, and you can read right along with us. I would encourage you, though, I really would, to get a copy of it. They're not very expensive at all. And many times, if you don't have the money, a group will give you one. You can go to your service offices and so forth. You can buy them online. But to do this workshop that we're doing without reading along, I think you're cheating yourself. So try to get a hold of one of those. If you can't, give me a call here at Take 12 Radio at 541-926-0322, or email me at take12radio@comcast.net. We'll find a way. We'll get a hold of somebody that will get you one of these things. It's really not that difficult to do. Chris, thank you so much.
You got it, Monty. We'll see you again next week.
We will see you next week. All right, friends, don't forget, we are concerned about you. We want you to succeed, and we're wishing God's serenity for you.
Been
Bye-bye.
a broadcast of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.